The great chamber of the Galactic Council was a place of beauty and terror. Its dome showed the stars outside, a peaceful view of space. But inside there was only panic. Lights flashed on the main screen showing a nightmare. It was a wave of living ships, a swarm so vast it blocked the light from distant suns. This was the Devourer swarm. It consumed worlds, leaving behind only dust and silence. Ambassador Kale stood at the center of the room. His body was made of a crystal that caught the light. He was old, very old, and he had seen many threats, but he had never seen anything like this. The reports were all the same. The swarm was unstoppable. Their ships were not built like normal ships. They were grown, a mix of metal and flesh. Energy weapons did little to slow them down. They simply absorbed the blasts and kept coming. "The Rimward defense fleet is gone," cried one of the ambassadors, a being with many tentacles. "They were wiped out in moments." "Our weapons are useless," shouted another. Kyle raised a shining hand. "Silence." His voice was like grinding stone. "We will not fall to fear. The Stellar Lance is ready. It will purge this infestation." The Stellar Lance was the Council's greatest weapon, a ship so powerful it could crack a planet. The ambassadors quieted, finding comfort in Kale's confidence. They trusted their technology, their ancient power. They did not trust the unknown. It was at this moment of fragile hope that a new message arrived. A small ship was requesting permission to enter the chamber. It was a human ship, the KSV Dauntless. The humans were newcomers to the galaxy. They were young, loud, and unpredictable. Most of the older species saw them as children. Kale was annoyed. The humans had a habit of showing up where they were not wanted. But protocol was protocol. "Allow them entry," he said, his voice dripping with impatience. The Dauntless was tiny compared to the Council ships. It was a simple design, built for speed and exploration, not for war. It flew into the vast chamber and landed gently. The ramp lowered and 3 humans walked out. First was Captain Sue. She was a woman with a calm face and sharp eyes. She did not look around in wonder at the chamber. Her eyes went straight to the main screen, to the image of the swarm. Her expression became grim. Next was Jin, the chief engineer. He was already looking at a datapad in his hand, his brow furrowed in concentration. He paid no attention to the alien ambassadors. His world was one of numbers and machines. Last was Chul, the communications officer. He was young, and he did look around, his eyes wide. He saw the fear on the faces of the ambassadors, and he felt a chill. Captain Sue stopped before Ambassador Kale and gave a respectful nod. "Ambassador, thank you for seeing us. Your timing is unfortunate, human," Kale said, not bothering to hide his irritation. "The Council faces an existential threat. We do not have time for pleasantries." "We know about the threat," Sue said, her voice steady. "That is why we are here. The Dauntless has been observing the Devourer swarm for the past 3 months. We believe we have found a weakness." A wave of murmurs went through the chamber. Kyle's crystalline form seemed to harden. "A weakness? Our finest scientists have studied the swarm for cycles. They have found nothing. What could your primitive scouts have possibly discovered?" Jin looked up from his datapad, a flash of anger in his eyes. Sue gave him a slight shake of her head. She kept her focus on Kale. "It is not a physical weakness," Sue explained. "It is a systemic one. The swarm does not operate like a normal fleet. Our engineer Jin has analyzed their communication patterns. They are not a group of individuals. They are a single mind, a hive, and that mind operates on a specific quantum frequency. It is how they coordinate, how they navigate, how they think." Jin stepped forward, holding up his datapad. A complex web of light and sound waves appeared above it. "See this? It's a resonant frequency. It's like a song that all of them are singing together. It holds them together. If you can disrupt that song, you disrupt everything. They would become blind. They would become deaf to each other. They would just fall apart." He looked at Kale, his face earnest. "We can build a device, a resonance emitter. It would broadcast a jamming signal, a wave of static on their specific frequency. It wouldn't destroy them with power. It would just confuse them completely." The chamber was silent for a moment. Then Ambassador Kale began to laugh. It was a cold, harsh sound like ice breaking. "You propose we fight the most terrifying threat this galaxy has ever seen with noise?" Kyle said, his voice full of contempt. "You think a simple jamming signal will stop a force that consumes worlds? It's not just noise," Jin insisted, his voice rising. "It's the foundation of their entire consciousness. It would be like taking away your ability to see or think. Enough! Kale's voice boomed through the chamber. He pointed a sharp, crystalline finger at the humans. You are children playing with forces you do not understand. Your offer is noted and it is rejected. The council will meet this threat with strength, not with tricks. He turned to the other ambassadors. The stellar lance will move into position. It will show the swarm and the entire galaxy that our power is absolute. We do not need the help of a species that has barely learned to walk among the stars. Sue's calm finally broke. Ambassador, please. We have seen the data. The stellar lance is a powerful weapon, but it is still just a weapon of force. The swarm will adapt to it. They will absorb its energy and use it against you. Our way is the only way to break them without losing your entire fleet. Kale looked down at her. His pride was a wall that her words could not break. Your way is a fantasy. It is the desperate idea of a weak species that has never faced a true war. We will not stake our survival on a human theory. He made a sweeping gesture. The council has made its decision. You will take your ship and you will leave council space immediately. Do not interfere again. The dismissal was final. The other ambassadors looked away, ashamed or afraid to disagree with Kale. The humans stood alone in the center of the magnificent chamber. Sue looked at Kale for a long moment. She saw the certainty in his eyes, the unshakable belief in his own superiority. She knew there was nothing more she could say. She nodded slowly, a gesture of cold acceptance. Very well, Ambassador, she said, her voice quiet but clear. We will leave. We will watch. And we hope, for all your sakes, that you are right. She turned and walked back towards the Dauntless. Jin and Chul followed her, their shoulders slumped in defeat. The ramp closed behind them, sealing them inside their small, simple ship. As the Dauntless lifted off and flew out of the chamber, Ambassador Kale watched it go. He felt a flicker of doubt, but he quickly pushed it down. The humans were wrong. They had to be. The stellar lance was the answer. Power was the only language the swarm would understand. He did not know that he had just thrown away the galaxy's only hope. The silence on the bridge of the KSV Dauntless was heavy and thick. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the silence of people who had tried to warn others about a coming storm, only to be shut out and ignored. Captain Sue sat in her command chair, her hands resting on her knees. She stared at the main view screen, which showed the receding image of the Galactic Council Station. It was a beautiful, glittering jewel of technology and power. Soon, it would be in the path of the swarm. Jin was down in the engineering bay. He was not a man who handled anger well. He preferred the clean logic of machines, so he did the only thing he could. He buried himself in his work. His screens were filled with the same complex data he had tried to show the council. The resonant frequency of the swarm glowed like a twisted, beautiful song. He ran the simulations again and again. Each time, the result was the same. A properly tuned disruptive pulse would cause catastrophic systemic failure across the entire swarm network. It was so clear to him, so obvious. He slammed his fist on the console. They just wouldn't listen, he muttered to the empty room. Chul, at his communication station on the bridge, was the one who had to listen to the open channels. He heard the confident chatter of the council fleet. He heard the captains and admirals speaking with the unshakable belief that their technology would save them. They talked about the stellar lance with a kind of religious awe. It made Chul feel sick. He looked over at Captain Sue. Captain, orders? He asked, his voice soft. The council was very clear. We are to leave the area. Sue did not look away from the view screen. Plot a course to the edge of the designated quarantine zone, Cull. Take us to the absolute limit of where we are allowed to be. Then hold position. You think they'll change their minds? Chul asked, a flicker of hope in his voice. Sue finally turned her head, her eyes tired. No, I don't. But I will not run away while a civilization is destroyed. I need to see it. We all need to see it. So the small human ship moved to the very edge of the battle zone. It was like a tiny bird watching a forest fire from the last safe branch of a tree. On the main screen, they could see the massive council fleet gathering. The ships were magnificent. They were sleek and shining, their hulls made of materials that shimmered with energy. They moved with a graceful, confident order that was the opposite of the chaotic, pulsing mass of the swarm. And then the council's pride arrived. The stellar lance. It was not so much a ship as a mobile weapon the size of a small moon. It was long and needle-like, with a massive focusing array at its front that glowed with a dangerous building light. It moved slowly with the weight of immense power. It positioned itself between the Council fleet and the approaching swarm. "Channel is open," Chul said. "They're broadcasting the attack fleet-wide." Ambassador Kale's voice filled the bridge of the Dauntless. It was strong and proud. "People of the Council, today we show this galaxy that order and power will always triumph over mindless consumption. The stellar lance will fire, and the swarm will be erased from existence." Down in engineering, Jin heard the broadcast. He stopped his work and pulled up a visual feed on his screen. He watched, his heart pounding, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The swarm continued its advance. It did not slow. It did not change formation. It was a wave of claws and teeth and chitinous shells, silent and relentless. A brilliant, blinding light erupted from the tip of the stellar lance. It was a beam of pure, white energy so intense that the view screen on the Dauntless automatically dimmed to protect their eyes. The beam lanced across space, silent in the vacuum. It struck the center of the swarm armada. The effect was immediate and devastating. A dozen, then 24, then 50 swarm ships simply vaporized. They disappeared into clouds of expanding gas and molten debris. A cheer went up over the open communication channel from the Council fleet. It was a sound of pure triumph. On the bridge of the Dauntless, Chul let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. It worked? Captain Sue said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on the tactical display. "Look," she said quietly. For a moment it seemed like the swarm was breaking. But then the impossible happened. The swarm ships that were on the edges of the blast began to move. Their dark organic hulls started to shimmer, taking on a mirror-like quality. The vast, churning mass of the swarm, which had paused for a single historical moment, began to flow again. It did not retreat. It adapted. The stellar lance fired again, another brilliant spear of light. This time, when it hit the swarm, the effect was different. The energy did not vaporize the ships. It splashed against their mirrored hulls, scattering. Some ships were still destroyed, but far fewer. The swarm was learning. It was dissipating the energy. "It's polarizing its hull." Jin's voice came over the ship's intercom from engineering. He was watching the sensor data in real time. "It's turning itself into a giant heat sink. It's distributing the energy across thousands of ships. They're absorbing the blast." A third time, the stellar lance fired. This time, the beam was noticeably weaker. The weapon needed time to recharge, and it was not getting it. The swarm ships at the front of the armada glowed a fierce cherry red from the absorbed heat, but they did not break. They kept coming. The communication channel was no longer filled with cheers. It was filled with confused reports, then with panic. "The swarm is not slowing. Their hulls are resisting the primary weapon. Energy dispersion is occurring." The swarm reached the stellar lance. It did not attack the great weapon with beams or missiles. It simply engulfed it. Smaller swarm vessels, like locusts, latched onto its massive hull. They began to chew. They broke apart the super-dense armor, feeding on the metal and siphoned energy. The stellar lance fired one last pathetic flicker of light, and then it was gone, consumed by the living tide. With their ultimate weapon destroyed, the Council fleet was lost. Their coordinated formations broke. Their powerful energy weapons proved useless. The swarm washed over them. It was not a battle. It was a feeding. Ships that had shone with pride moments before were now being torn apart, their pieces added to the biomass of the swarm. The Dauntless watched it all. They saw the fleet die. They heard the final, terrified screams over the comms before Chul, his face pale and sick, muted the channel. The silence on the bridge was now the silence of a tomb. On the main view screen, a secondary feed showed the inside of the Galactic Council chamber. The scene was one of utter chaos. Ambassadors were running, shouting. The great dome showed the swarm, closer now than ever, blocking out the stars. In the center of it, create more chapters. Headings or parts numbers in each par. The image of the dying Council fleet was burned into their minds. The bridge of the Dauntless was no longer silent, but filled with a low, purposeful hum. The quiet shock had been replaced by a tense and focused energy. Captain Sue's order had been given. They were not running. They were flying into the mouth of the beast. Jin was already a whirlwind of action in the engineering bay. Panels were pulled from the walls, revealing the complex guts of the ship. Wires snaked across the floor. His small team of engineers worked with a speed born of desperation. The ship's main faster-than-light drive core was being carefully rerouted. It was not meant for this. It was designed to fold space, to push the ship between stars. Now Jin was turning it into a giant battery for a weapon that had only existed in his simulations. "I need the primary power conduits linked to the lateral array," he shouted, his hands moving quickly inside an open console. "We have one chance to get this right. The pulse has to be perfect. Too weak and it's just a loud noise to them. Too strong and we'll vaporize ourselves along with the core." On the bridge, Sue was strapped into her pilot's chair. Her hands danced over the navigation console. The course was plotted. It was a terrifying line on the screen. A straight dive from the edge of the battle zone directly into the densest part of the swarm. It was a suicide run. Chul was at his station, his face pale but determined. His job was the most delicate. He was using the ship's long-range sensors to listen. He wasn't listening for communications anymore. He was listening for the swarm's song. He had to find the exact, precise quantum frequency Jin needed, and he had to keep tracking it as they moved closer, as the signal became stronger and more chaotic. "Jin, I'm feeding you the live data stream now," Chul said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "The frequency is stable, but it's complex. It's like 1,000 different voices all singing the same note, but with tiny variations." "Just keep it clean, Chul," Jin's voice crackled over the intercom. "Any interference in my calculations are garbage." The Dauntless began to move. It was a small ship and it accelerated quickly. It shot away from the safe dark edge of space and headed towards the living storm. The view screen showed the swarm ahead. It was no longer a distant image. It was a wall of nightmares. They could see the individual shapes of the ships now. Jagged edges, glowing organic lights, and grasping claws. Alarms began to blare on the bridge. "They've seen us," Sue said, her voice calm. She gripped the controls tighter. "Hold on." The swarm did not see them as a threat. It saw them as food. A small group of swarm interceptors, like sharp, angry insects, broke away from the main body and shot towards the Dauntless. They moved with a terrifying, unnatural speed. Sue's hands were a blur. She pushed the ship into a violent roll. The inertial dampeners whined, struggling to keep up. The crew was thrown against their harnesses. A blast of plasma shot past the view screen. So close they could feel the heat radiation. "Evasive pattern Delta," Sue commanded. The Dauntless twisted and turned, a tiny fish trying to avoid the teeth of a shark. Another blast hit their rear shields. The ship shuddered violently. Red lights flashed on Sue's console. "Aft shields are down to 40%, she called out. Down in engineering, the shudder felt like an earthquake. A shower of sparks erupted from an overloaded panel. One of the engineers cried out and fell back, but Jin didn't stop. He was syncing the FTL core with the new jury-rigged emitter array. Sweat poured down his face. "I need more time, Captain," he yelled into the comm. "We don't have more time." Sue shot back, pulling the ship into a steep dive that made the metal groan. "They're all around us." Chul clung to his console, his knuckles white. The sensor data was becoming a mess. The proximity to the swarm was causing massive interference. The beautiful, clear frequency he had been tracking was now a storm of chaotic noise. "Jin, the signal is breaking up. There's too much feedback from all the nearby ships." "Filter it out." Jin's voice was desperate. "You have to. If the pulse is off by even a decimal point, it won't work." Chul took a deep breath, forcing his hands to stop shaking. He tuned out the blaring alarms and the violent shaking of the ship. He focused only on the stream of data. He created new filters, blocking out the screaming noise of the closest ships, searching for the deep, underlying hum of the central hive mind. It was like trying to hear a single voice in a roaring hurricane. The Dauntless was taking a beating. Warning lights were flashing across every console. The swarm interceptors were swarming them, their weapons firing relentlessly. "Hull breach on Deck 3, Sue reported, her voice strained, "sealing it off." They were getting closer to the center. The main body of the swarm loomed ahead, a planet-sized mass of writhing, connected ships. It was a terrifying sight. It felt like they were flying into the belly of a giant beast. "I'm losing control of the port thrusters," Sue said. "We can't take much more of this." "Almost there," Jin shouted. "The core is linked. The emitter is charging." Chul's eyes widened. "I've got it. Jin, I've isolated the core frequency. It's cleaner now, stronger. Sending the final data packet now." On Jin's screen, the chaotic waves of noise suddenly resolved into a single, powerful resonant wave. It was the song of the swarm, the song that held it together. He quickly entered the final commands. programming the emitter to broadcast the exact opposite, a wave of pure, disruptive static that would cancel it out. The Dauntless shot into the very heart of the swarm. The viewscreen was filled with a monstrous landscape of living metal and pulsating flesh. There was no space left. They were surrounded on all sides. "This is it," Sue yelled. "We're in position. Now, Jin, do it now." Jin didn't hesitate. His hand slammed down on the final activation switch. There was no bright light. No loud explosion. For a second, nothing happened. Then a deep, powerful hum filled the ship. It was a sound that vibrated in their bones. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the dim red glow of emergency power. Every system on the ship shut down at once. The constant noise of the engines and computers went silent. The only sound was the strange, deep hum of the emitter. They were adrift, a dead ship in the center of the enemy. The deep hum was the only thing they could hear. It was a sound that seemed to come from inside their own heads. On the bridge of the Dauntless, the emergency lights cast long red shadows. Captain Sue strained against her harness, her eyes fixed on the main viewscreen. The ship was dead. All power, except for the life support and the strange emitter, was gone. They were drifting, a piece of silent metal in the middle of their enemies. For a terrifying moment, nothing changed. The swarm ships around them continued their relentless, coordinated movement. Their glowing lights pulsed with the same steady rhythm. One of the jagged interceptors turned towards the motionless Dauntless, its claws extending, ready to grab the easy meal. Sue held her breath. This was it. They had failed. They had thrown their lives away on a theory. Then the interceptor stopped. Its sharp, purposeful movement became a slow, clumsy drift. The glowing lights on its body flickered wildly like a broken sign. It bumped gently into the side of the Dauntless and just floated there inert. Sue's eyes widened. She looked beyond that single ship. The change was spreading. It was like watching a wave move through a crowd. The swarm ships closest to them began to slow down. Their synchronized flight patterns broke apart. They started to drift in random directions. Two ships, moving without any coordination, collided. It was not a violent explosion. It was a slow, grinding crash of two dead things. Then another collision happened. And another. The beautiful, terrifying song of the swarm had been replaced by a deafening silence inside their minds. The single, unified consciousness was gone. What was left were thousands of individual bodies, blind, deaf, and brainless. They had no instructions. They had no purpose. They were just empty shells. The wave of chaos spread out from the Dauntless at the speed of light. It moved through the entire swarm armada. The vast planet-sized mass of ships simply fell apart. The coordinated advance turned into a messy, expanding cloud of confusion. Ships that had been moving as one now spun aimlessly or floated in straight lines until they hit something. The entire battlefield became a slow-motion disaster area. On the bridge, Chul let out a choked sound. He was staring at his sensor screen, which was running on backup battery power. It's working," he whispered. Then he said it louder, his voice filled with disbelief and awe. "Captain, it's working!" The swarm. Their network is gone. I'm reading zero coordinated activity. It's just noise! Down in the engineering bay, Jin was slumped against his console. The red emergency light lit up the sweat on his face. He could hear Chul's voice over the intercom. He closed his eyes for a second, a wave of pure relief washing over him. His theory had been right. The math had been correct. He had taken the galaxy's most terrifying weapon and turned it into a harmless cloud of junk with a single, well-placed note. He pushed himself up. "The emitter is burned out, Captain," he reported, his voice tired but firm. "It's gone. But the job is done. The frequency is stable. The swarm is broken." Captain Sue finally allowed herself to breathe. She unclenched her hands from the controls. They were stiff and sore. She looked at the view screen, at the incredible scene of destruction they had caused. It was not a destruction of fire and explosions. It was a destruction of order. It was the quiet, total victory of chaos over a single mind. The silence on the battlefield was profound. The few remaining council ships, which had been fleeing in a panic, now slowed to a stop. They hung in space, their sensors undoubtedly confirming the impossible. The unstoppable force was no more. Then, a light began to flash on Chul's communication panel. It was a priority channel. "An incoming message, Captain," Chul said, his voice hushed. It's from the Council. It's Ambassador Kale's personal code." Sue took a deep breath. She straightened in her chair, smoothing down her uniform. She nodded to Chul. Put him through. The main view screen flickered. The image of the chaotic, dying swarm was replaced by the face of Ambassador Kale. The scene behind him was the council chamber, but it was no longer chaotic. It was frozen in a silent, stunned awe. Kyle looked different. The proud, sharp angles of his crystalline face seemed softer. The light inside him, which had been so dim with despair before, now flickered with a new, strange emotion. It was not happiness. It was something deeper. It was reverence. It was shock. He looked directly at Sue, and for a long moment he could not speak. He simply stared as if he was seeing a ghost. Or a god. When he finally found his voice, it was quiet. All the arrogance and pride were gone, scraped away by the terror of what had almost happened and the miracle of what just did. "Human vessel dauntless," he began, his voice a rough whisper. He stopped, struggling to form the words. What have you done?" The face of Ambassador Kale filled the silent bridge. His question hung in the air. "What have you done?" Captain Sue leaned forward slightly in her chair. She was tired. Every muscle in her body ached. The ship around her was broken and dark, but her voice was clear and steady. "What was necessary, Ambassador," she replied. There was no anger in her tone. There was no gloating. It was a simple statement of fact. They had done what needed to be done because no one else would. On the screen, Kale seemed to shrink. He looked away from Sue for a moment, his crystalline form dimming as if in shame. He was remembering his own words, his cold dismissal of their help. He was remembering the pride that had cost so many lives. He looked back, and his voice was hollow with the weight of his mistake. The council, we were fools." The admission seemed to pain him, but he forced the words out. "Our pride blinded us. We looked at your ship, your youth, and we saw weakness. We did not see the strength of your mind, the power of your idea." He took a moment, gathering himself. "You have saved our civilization. You have saved billions of lives on countless worlds. We owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid." He then did something that was rarely seen. He bowed his head, a deep and formal gesture of the highest honor and submission from his species. It was a sign of profound gratitude and respect. On the bridge, Chul watched the screen, his mouth slightly open. He was watching one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy bow to their broken little ship. Jin had climbed up from engineering and stood at the back of the bridge, covered in grime and sweat. He watched the display, his arms crossed. He felt no victory, only a grim satisfaction that his work had not been in vain. Sue did not move from her chair. She accepted the gesture with a slow, respectful nod of her own, but her eyes were hard. "Don't thank us, Ambassador," she said, her voice cutting through the formal moment. "Just remember this day. Remember the price of your pride. Remember that the stellar lance, your greatest symbol of power, was consumed like a snack. And remember that it was this ship, this primitive human ship, that stopped the enemy you could not." She looked from the screen to the tired, dirty faces of her crew. Jin, the engineer who saw a solution everyone else ignored. Chul, the communications officer who found a song in the chaos. Then she looked back at Kyle. "Remember that humanity does not need to be the biggest or the oldest or the strongest to be the ones who save you." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We just need to be smarter." Ambassador Kale held her gaze. There was no argument left in him. He had been humbled on a galactic scale. "We will remember," he said, and for the first time, his voice held a note of genuine sincerity. "The story of the Dauntless will be told for as long as our history is recorded. The day the children saved their elders from themselves." With that, the transmission ended. The screen returned to its view of the battlefield. The swarm was still a mess of drifting, colliding husks. It was no longer a threat. It was just debris. The first Council rescue ships began to arrive. They were medical vessels and tugs, their lights blinking calmly as they moved through the graveyard of the swarm. They gave the silent, dark Dauntless a wide berth, treating it not as a piece of wreckage but as a monument. The crew of the Dauntless worked slowly to get basic systems back online. Power was restored to the lights and life support. The engines were dead and would need a tow. But they were alive. Jin stood beside Sue, looking out at the view. "It worked," he said quietly. "Yes, it did," Sue replied. They'll probably want the specs for the emitter, Jin said. The council, now that they know it works? Let them ask, Sue said, a faint smile touching her lips for the first time. And we will decide if we want to share. Things are different now. And they were. The Dauntless drifted silently, a small, battered ship surrounded by the evidence of its incredible victory. It was not a famous warship. It was not a grand vessel of an ancient empire. It was a scout ship, with a Korean name and a human crew. But from that day forward, across the galaxy, the story was told. It was the story of the day the mighty Galactic Council, in all its pride, faced annihilation. It was the story of how they rejected the only help that could save them. And it was the story of the humans, who helped them anyway. The Dauntless became a silent legend, a reminder that true strength is not always about who has the biggest gun. Sometimes it is about who has the cleverest idea, and that humanity, the newcomers, had proven they had ideas that could shake the very foundations of the stars.